Good morning or good afternoon, friends. It's nice to be with you. I'm very glad to be back in Memphis. Mostly I come for the lunch, which is magnificent, so don't miss it. You can just take a sleep between now and then. Our short reading today, read by Scott, is from Luke's Gospel. And in it, you hear Jesus turning his face to Jerusalem, and his disciples demonstrate their violent fantasies by asking him if he wants them to destroy a Samaritan town. I'd like to take a little hop, skip and a jump through Luke's Gospel very briefly, just to locate this because of how important it is. Luke's Gospel starts with the childhood narrative, and then there's time in the wilderness when Jesus spends time with the talkative devil. And then there's the launch into the Galilee ministry. And the Galilee ministry occurs from the time in the desert right up until this very moment that we've just read. And then this text tells us that he sets his face to Jerusalem. It's in chapter 9. But there's 10 long, agonizing chapters on his way to Jerusalem. For the Galilee ministry, he was wandering here, there, and everywhere. But the journey to Jerusalem takes these 10 long chapters, aching. It's a narrative device that Luke has used. Then he gets to Jerusalem. There's the crucifixion. And then the disciples leave Jerusalem on the way to Emmaus, and they meet a stranger on the way, and they hurry back to Jerusalem. That's a bit of an overview about the way that in Jerusalem, not in Jerusalem, on the way to it, is really one of the ways to understand the structure of Luke's Gospel. It's a hinge point, this text in Luke's Gospel, when the depiction of the followers moves from one of people who get him to people who don't. And Jesus' strange, perplexing mission emerges as quite different to what his disciples, even later on, will say. We had hoped he was the one to redeem Israel. They understood that he might have had a desire to get rid of Roman occupation. This is chapter 9, and it's clear that Luke is using the depiction of violence towards the Samaritans in chapter 9, that fantasy, to address overall imaginations, because in the next chapter, there's that text that records the Good Samaritan, a text whose introduction also contains a you, where Jesus says to a teacher of the law, "What's written in the law? What do you read there?" And ultimately, that's what I want to talk about, is the way that we use the word you when we talk. Both of these sections are in the general melee of Jesus sending followers out with a message. It's a confusing message. Jesus of Nazareth was an intelligent man. He must have absolutely understood that people saw his mission as a political one when he did not have a political mission himself. The arrival of the fictional Samaritan in chapter 10, the good one, is striking. That Samaritan is like a trope of benevolence, and he's extolled and he's praised and he's someone to emulate. Be like the best people among your enemies is one of the messages from this. But another way to take it is be like the guy from your own town who's willing to accept help from an enemy. That's probably much more difficult. And then the only other mention of Samaritans in Luke is in chapter 17, where 10 people are healed from leprosy, one of whom is a Samaritan, and he comes back to thank Jesus. So it's clear that Luke has a project of trying to depict people who are often categorized in a way that confuses the way that they're spoken about. When are we not living in polarized times? Sometimes I hear people say, the 1990s was a time of great optimism. You had the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you had the Northern Ireland peace process. But there was the Rwanda genocide too, and the Balkans, and all those other places we don't know about. It's easy to think that because time was easy for you, time was easy for all, but it wasn't the case. And so in a terrible way, there's nothing new about the polarized times we're living in, maybe just for you, maybe just for me. What we hear is that these days, however, there's some people whose public language makes them sound more like the sons of thunder here will be called down fire from heaven to destroy them than it does their strange friend. I wonder why James and John would say this. Do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them? Look at the pronouns. You, us, them. what's interesting to me is that they seem to think that they could call fire from heaven to come down to consume them. They seem to believe they could. There is plenty of fire in Luke's Gospel. Early on, John the Baptist has been talking about he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. His winnowing fork is in his hand to clear his threshing floor and to gather the wheat into his granary, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire. Anthrax, I think that's what that is in Greek. Why would they want to do this, even if they could? My guess is that they hadn't really thought about Samaritans at all, at least not thought properly. They had thought about what they thought the Samaritans were about quite a lot, which is another way of saying they thought about themselves. Here's what Howard Thurman says on the necessity of good thought. Often the degree to which we oppose a thing marks the degree to which we do not understand it. Sometimes we use our opposition to an idea to cover up our own ignorance. We express our dislike for things, sometimes for people, when we do not understand the things we pretend to dislike, when we do not know the people for whom we have the antagonism. Another thing about James and John is that they believed they could, and for them, because they thought they could, they thought they should. Having the capacity to destroy does not necessarily endorse destruction. I have to remind myself of that. Maybe you do. Maybe others do too. The confidence of James and John is clear. Their confidence in fire. Confidence to display the raw desire to destroy. Did they expect a reward? Did they expect Jesus to say, "Oh my God, you hate the people I hate. Yay, brothers." Fantastic. What about the Samaritans, though? This is nestled into the text that Scott read. On their way, they entered a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him, but they did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. That tiny little clause, because his face was set toward Jerusalem. What an interesting thing. The history of the distinctions and divisions between Jews and Samaritans is long, and it might be described by Freud as the narcissism of petty differences. In a way, it was easy to fight against the near neighbour who was somewhat distinct but not too different to you than it was to fight the enemy, which is the Romans. In conflict mediation, we were always taught that after a death, a family would probably find it easier to fight about the inheritance of the old favourite radio, because you can fight your brother for the radio and you can't fight death. The Samaritans were close, but to the Jews, proximally, as well as in their text. I think there was 2,000 differences between the Samaritan Torah and the Jewish Torah. However, the Torah that's used today includes many of the distinctions that are from the Samaritan side. So they were so close. And so theirs was not a Jerusalem-focused imagination of religion. So hence, when they see that his face was set to Jerusalem, they're like, okay, not interested. How interesting. So to go back to James and John, the sons of thunder, these are close compatriots of Jesus. Just the chapter before, they'd been admitted to the house of Jairus, whose daughter had died. And then they're also brought up the mountain of transfiguration. So they're in the inner circle. And here they are, braggadocious, dangerous, with a weak imagination about their friend. They were going to Jerusalem, and my guess is that they thought some big showdown was happening. And so maybe if they just destroyed a few villages on the way, it would make the people who they really cared about quake in their boots. So the Samaritans were perhaps just pawns or fodder for a greater project. Light them up so that the real enemy will see what we really mean to do. We might do this a lot these days, or hear about it a lot. It's easy to look at these two sons of thunder, as they're called. It seems to be a nickname that Jesus of Nazareth gave them, these brothers, James and John. It's easy to look at them and to think, haha, the fools. I suppose I want to see myself as the fool. I want to see myself as the time where I think, okay, violence toward them is justified in order for a greater cause that I believe in. Their mistake, my mistake perhaps, is thinking that the you they spoke to was a you they knew. The proximity led them to overfamiliarity. and led them to treating somebody close to them as a blank canvas upon whom they could project. To know who we think is a you can be a dangerous thing, especially if we assign that you with power and are in that you's close circle. And so what we need is not proximity. It is the strange. It is the presence of absence. It is withdrawal. The you that we're over-familiar with may lead us to thinking that our knowledges overlap. If you want it, of course, in this text is we want it. Or maybe we want you to want it so that we can justify the fact that we want it. But also it can be you must want this. Otherwise, we might not want you. So there's power in this. There's communication, a certain adulation. If you want it, we'll do it. But also it's a message to this character to say, you should want it. We might turn on you, call down fire from heaven on you, if you don't want the things that we want you to want. So what can we do in all of this when I'm caught like a son of thunder up in these dynamics? I suppose that the invitation is to seek absence, to seek strangeness. Biblical scholars say that there's a text that some ancient sources include in this reading that isn't included in many of the translations of the Gospel of Luke. And the text says, he rebuked them and said, you do not know what spirit you are of, for the Son of Man has not come to destroy the lives of human beings, but to save them. What an interesting thing. You do not know what spirit you are of. Ignatius of Loyola says that we should always discern the good spirit and the bad spirit, which isn't kind of like the angel on one shoulder and the demon on the other. It's really to say the voice in you, the breath in you that's leading you towards destruction for your own convenience, or leading you towards something of courage. Arundhati Roy, the brilliant Indian writer, says something that I think is pertinent here. She says, your enemies are always manufactured to suit your purpose, right? How can you have a good enemy? You have to have an utterly evil enemy. And then the evilness has to progress. So this shows the strange dependency on the fantasy of the enemy, the desire for the enemy, and that the object of fantasy they become, they are the signifier to the sign we need, which is, who am I allowed to hate? And what will that facilitate in me? I think what we're looking for is the pursuit of the unknown, which is an oxymoron, I know, or to know the unknown, or to come into conversation with the unknown, or to foster the curiosity about what it might be to remind ourselves over and over again of everything we do not know. Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst, says that the very foundation of interhuman discourse is misunderstanding. And he wasn't saying that to make us feel like idiots. He was saying, this is it. Misunderstanding. We're all translating strange things to ourselves. How could we understand each other? And so therefore, how will we live with each other? Perfect understanding is always going to be elusive. Each of the dynamics that we see and hear, the you we hate, the you we want to dominate, the you we want to praise into meeting our own agenda, they're demonstrations of hostility. The gospel tradition responds to this in the literature with the presence of absence. He dies, he doesn't fight back. How interesting. Even if he didn't rise, it would have been a very interesting self-sacrifice for the purpose of paying attention to what needed to be given attention to. Or as Thomas, the grumpy Welsh poet, says the following, the absence. It is this great absence that is like a presence that compels me to address it without hope of a reply. It is a room I enter from which someone has just gone, the vestibule for the arrival of one who has not yet come. Later on, in the presence of Jesus, two heartbroken, confused friends meet a stranger. They meet a stranger who doesn't understand their heartbreak, and they don't understand how anybody can not know what's going on. They say to this stranger, are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days? Are you the only? Listen to the you there. Suddenly they don't know. They're not saying, if you want it, we'll do the following things. These are different disciples, but it is another pairing. And then this stranger says, "Oh, how foolish you are." Their hearts burn in this strange encounter with a stranger, and they urge him to stay with them for a meal. And a new community is made in the landscape of the unknown, in the landscape of the fresh, in the landscape of the curious, in the landscape of, "Tell us more. What do you mean?" They do not know him enough to project onto him anymore. And so therefore, this is like a theology of the strange and a theology of the stranger, a theology of curiosity and a theology of learning that is unafraid of its own ignorance. Then it says, "Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight." Even here, the literature keeps on saying, he keeps on going. What it is you think is the right answer will keep on evading you. It's like the horizon. You'll never get to it. And in this context, I suppose what it speaks to of is a continual journey of learning and a continual journey of reminding ourselves of the strange, of the here and not here, of the gone and not gone. Si enim comprehendis non est Deus, Augustine of Hippo said. If you comprehend it, it is not God.